Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. What? No, really? Fake video, guys. Definitely not true, okay? There's no way. They wouldn't lie. They wouldn't lie to us. Joking, but I'm curious. Hey guys, my name's Connor if you're new. Original link to the video top the description. The CIA coups you were never taught about in school. Side projects. Simon. Great, let's go.
Loves the coup. I'll tell you who loves the coup. The US of A.
What are you
yes,
talking
Uncle
about?
Sam isn't happy with the way you're running things. You might soon find yourself with the barrel of a rifle pointed in your face as your nearest general seizes power from underneath you. And that's what we're exploring today. We're going to delve into 7 of the many coups that Washington, D.C. has had a hand in over the years. The Cold War might have been cold, Dad, but it certainly wasn't cold for everyone.
Again, this is one of the things that you learn as you get older as an American, usually, at least I have, that a lot of an intervention that we do around the world seems to be implied that it was for democracy and making sure people could choose and they didn't have some dictatorship. But when you grow older, you realize they just had a guy in charge that wasn't good for us and our interests, and so we killed him. And that's often more, it seems like that's the case more often than not. So yeah, I'm not going to be completely surprised by this video, but I'm sure I'm going to learn a bit. Guatemala, 1954.
Our first stop, Central America, where we're traveling to the nation of Guatemala. But why would the US want to overthrow the government of a
My Rhode Island flag fell. I'll put it up later.
country so inconsequential? Well, I'll tell you the key word: communism. In 1951, Jacobo Arbenz was elected as leader of the nation. A leftist, Arbenz quickly implemented land reforms with the aim of redistributing property to the poor. Now, this by itself might have been reason enough for Washington to step in, so much as whispering the words land reform during the Cold War was a quick way to get Uncle Sam on your doorstep. But that's not all. There was also the fear that nations would fall to communism like dominoes. The US aimed to contain that growth wherever it could. What's more is that Arbenz's land reforms threatened the operations of the United Fruit Company today Chiquita. At the time, United Fruit had considerable influence over Central America, which is where the phrase banana republic comes from actually. Workers were exploited for very little pay, corruption was rampant, and the company was effectively invincible. Arbenz's land reforms threatened United Fruit, who put pressure on the Eisenhower administration, who were later found to have a financial stake in United Fruit, by the way. Conflict of interest, perhaps? Known as Operation PB Success, the CIA launched an assault on Guatemalan democracy. They hired militias from Honduras to start a war against the Arbenz regime, led by Castilla Mas. Funding, equipment, and training were provided by the CIA. Meanwhile, the US propaganda machine went into overdrive. The war, combined with the psychological warfare and more, led to Arbenz resigning in 1954. Hamas, now in power, swiftly reversed Arbenz's land policies. Eventually, his suppressive and authoritarian regime led to the Guatemalan Civil War, where over the next 36 years, 200,000 Guatemalans would lose their lives, many at the hands of US-backed paramilitary groups.
Iran. So it seems like I'm going to be using that a lot. It seems like, because with a subject that I'm really not that comfortable in, I'm going to have to say that. It seems like there was a lot of paranoia that the U.S. government had towards any countries going towards the Soviet team or the communist Soviet team. And so even if a country like, say, Guatemala wasn't a direct threat to the United States because they had a government that didn't like the U.S. that much, it wasn't really that. It was that that's another player that joins the team of the or could possibly join the team of the country that you don't like in the USSR, right? And so that's what it seems to be, or just oil interests or something like that. And even if it's about oil, it does also seem like it's about oil with a country that they don't want to be under the Soviet influence, and so there was this paranoia that they're either going to join us or they're going to join the Soviets. And that paranoia just led to seeing any country that was rising up, if they were going towards the Soviet side or like perhaps leaning towards that way, then it's coup time, which is crazy.
Iran was not
I don't
always
even
the way
know
it
if
is
I'm wrong.
today, a Shia Muslim autocracy under the rule of an all-powerful Ayatollah. No, instead, Iran actually used to be, to use the scientific term here, pretty chill. In the 50s, Iran was led by Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh and Shah Reza Pahlavi. Shah is sort of like a king. Mossadegh wanted to curtail the power of the Shah, alongside attempting to introduce reforms like the nationalization of oil. Well, that was a mistake. You see, the UK had controlled Iran's oil industry for decades, and nationalizing the industry would effectively sever the economic stranglehold it had. London could absolutely not have that, so they called Uncle Sam for a bit of a favor. A joint operation then ensued, led by Kermit Roosevelt Jr. Yep, that's actually his name, and the CIA set about undermining the Prime Minister. But despite his name, Roosevelt was no muppet. He circulated anti-Mossadegh propaganda, stirred dissent among the Islamic clergy, and convinced the Shah that Mossadegh was a threat. Shortly afterward, the Prime Minister was jailed and later placed under house arrest for life, leaving the Shah as the top governing authority in Iran. Over the next generation, he would grow in power, which, alongside a growing anti-American sentiment, would lead to the Iranian Revolution of 1979, leading to the Iranian regime that we know today. Despite the rumors that the US government...
Wait, so the Shah was already an established thing in Iran. It's just that Britain and the US saw the prime minister as a threat, and so they showed how the Shah, how he could be a threat to him, and then they got rid of him. I guess that makes sense. I thought the Shah was actually installed by Anglo-American
was involved. Washington
forces.
Wouldn't admit it until 2013. Africa wasn't safe from the CIA's meddling either, especially the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The DRC had gained its independence from Belgium in 1960 and immediately collapsed into political crisis. Patrice Lumumba had been chosen by the DRC's parliament to be its first prime minister. He pushed nationalist policies and appealed for Soviet support, which in the Cold War drew interest from Washington. And not in a let's come round for tea way, more in a we're gonna kill you way. A chaotic struggle ensued as both superpowers vied for control over the DRC, an ally with considerable natural resources. Meanwhile, mutinies broke out as black Congolese soldiers fought their white, mostly Belgian commanders. Lumumba, on the side of the Congolese soldiers and frustrated by the US's refusal to assist him, turned to the USSR, who supplied the Congolese military with support, advisors, and material. This split the Congolese government and turned the US off Lumumba. In Washington's eyes, he was a Soviet puppet, so
it's crazy that not only is it not the case that America was, going over to these places to, make sure they're democratic. It was actually the opposite. It was, you can't pick your guy. You can only pick your guy if both choices in the end are going to ally with us. And so when it comes to Iran or Democratic Republic of the Congo, two areas with very important natural resources that the USA doesn't want the Soviet Union to have a lot of sway and get those resources, then you kill them or you rise up against it. It's so crazy.
So he had to go. The US considered assassination plans, but they were unnecessary as CIA disinformation campaigns and the financial backing of Colonel Joseph Mobutu's coup led to Lumumba's arrest and death. Mobutu eventually launched another coup in 1965, taking full control. His regime would be characterized by brutal human rights abuses and corruption. His anti-communist stance ensured that he retained Western backing throughout the Cold War. Yes, even the largest country in Latin America wasn't safe. In 1961,
I would almost have less of a issue with the USA doing this stuff if it just took a more honest approach. Like, hey, you're going to fall into the Soviet hands, and so I'm going to make sure whoever's in power over here is allied with us, rather than some propagandized version of like, we have to save these people. Neither of those approaches is good, but at least one is more honest. The only thing worse than doing one of these things is making you look like you're actually helping them. That it almost makes it worse than if you were just full out like, yep, nope, this isn't about democracy or anything. I'm just making sure you're on our side.
President of Brazil, Jânio Quadros, abruptly resigned from his position, prompting a political crisis. The Brazilian military was enshrined in its 1946 constitution as the guarantor of law and order in the nation. But Quadros' resignation split the military between its duty and its deep distrust of the president's successor, João Goulart. The military even attempted to block Goulart's accession to the presidency. The US was also concerned as Goulart championed reforms that smelled an awful lot like communism. Brazil's relationship with Washington continued to deteriorate owing to a lack of trust. The JFK administration tried to bring Goulart back in line, but it was to no avail, and Washington started planning for his removal. The coup got underway under President Johnson in 1964 with tacit support from US Ambassador Lincoln Gordon, whose declassified cables confirmed that the CIA put measures in place to, quote, help strengthen resistance forces, including the delivery of weapons. DC even covertly launched Operation Brother Sam, which involved stationing an entire naval task force off of the coast of Brazil to assist if needed. But Goulart quickly fled, leaving Castelo Branco as the new leader of the nation. The army's dictatorship would stay in power until 1985. US involvement in the coup was believed to be a conspiracy theory until declassified documents confirmed suspicions decades after the fact. Brazil's junta was known for its extensive human rights abuses, censorship, and repression. But, I mean, hey, at least they weren't communists.
I was about to, for a second, give a benefit to the doubt, like, just because the U.S. is involved in so many coups, that maybe this one actually they aren't involved in. And then, nope, it was confirmed they were. And so, never mind. Okay.
If you thought that the US's involvement in Latin American regime change had ended in the 70s, you would be absolutely wrong. In 1970, self-proclaimed Marxist Salvador Allende had been just elected, promising to nationalize the US-owned copper companies within Chile. Did Washington take this in its stride and work with Allende towards common goals and compromises? No. Allende had purportedly received money from both Cuba and the Soviets, and there was no room for negotiation. Instead, the Nixon administration, concerned about the specter of communism, did whatever it could to stop Allende in his tracks. The CIA backed the assassination of a Chilean army commander, General René Schneider, as he opposed the idea of launching a coup, while Washington prepped the groundwork to remove Allende. The US's goal was to make it as difficult as possible for Allende to govern. This included blocking economic measures to the nation like international aid, World Bank cash, and even cutting export credits. The CIA laid the groundwork for a coup through propaganda, paying $1.5 million to daily San Diego publication El Mercurio to push anti-Allende messages. The president had been elected with only 30% of the vote. The economic hardship ramped up the pressure fueled by CIA propaganda. The country was a powder keg, and the spark was lit in 1973. Chilean military jets bombed the presidential palace, and General Augusto Pinochet would rise from the chaos, holding on to power until 1990 in a brutally oppressive anti-communist regime. 5 days afterwards, Nixon's national security advisor Henry Kissinger told the president in a reference to the coup, "We didn't do it. I mean, we helped."
Okay.
Yes, it may shock you to learn that the US orchestrated a coup against the leader of its own ally during a war that it was helping them fight. By 1963, the Vietnam War had been raging on for almost a decade. The North Vietnamese Army, China, and the USSR on one side faced off against the South Vietnamese Army and the United States on the other. South Vietnam at the time was governed by a president named Ngo Dinh Diem. He had been consolidating power for some time, but 1963 would change everything. Diem's brutal suppression of Buddhist demonstrators in the South led to a crisis in Saigon and Washington. The protests culminated in one monk lighting himself on fire as he meditated in protest, becoming one of the most powerful images of the war. Diem did not listen to the US's calls for moderacy, eventually declaring martial law. Washington knew that it had to act. DC was unhappy with how Diem had handled the war so far, and the Buddhist crisis was a really bad look. Members of the South Vietnamese military met with the CIA as the calls towards a coup gradually grew. In November of 1963, a group of officers overthrew Diem and his brother, killing them both a day later. Afterwards, Washington decided to get even more involved in the conflict, and well, you know the rest. The war raged until 1975 when the US pulled out. North Vietnamese tanks crashed through the presidential palace gates in Saigon soon after. Vietnam was reunified under the North's banner, and communism, including a painful program of re-education camps and repression of personal freedoms.
Worst part about the Vietnam, or I don't know if I can say worst part, it was a pretty horrifying conflict, is it seems like, what was his name? Ho Chi Minh. Is that his name? I think it was Ho Chi Minh. Was actually a pretty reasonable guy of what I learned about what he was trying to do. Like, when it comes to someone like Ho Chi Minh, I hope I'm thinking of the right guy. Ho Chi Minh. Yes, I am. Ho Chi Minh. Okay. When it comes to someone like Ho Chi Minh, that's a person who just wants to rid their country of outside tyranny that has been plaguing their country for 100 years at that point. How long? Because you had the French controlled you, and then the French leave, and then the Japanese attack you, and then the Japanese leave, and then the French try and get back in charge, and then the Americans attack, and then China is trying to use you, and then after the Americans leave, then China attacks you. It's like someone like Ho Chi Minh, I can't help but root for them, or thought I would have. Maybe I would have been fed some propaganda that wouldn't. But knowing what I know now, he seems like he was the most admirable one in any, easily the most, if you can call someone like the good guy, I would guess that would be the side, despite, you know, being communist or whatever, and despite how I feel about communism, it's not my country, and if you want to go for something that your country chooses to do, then that's amazing. But the fact that the USA would just go all the way across the world and bomb the crap out of your country and kill an enormous amount of people just to make sure that they get a government that is siding with them to be in power and then ultimately to lose. It's just crazy. Absolutely crazy.
It can be quite a surprise to learn just how many regimes the US helped overthrow, and what's more, many we only know about because of certain declassified documents. There may be additional coups that come to light in the future once future documents are publicized. But these weren't the only ones. Before, during, and after the Cold War, the US has proved very active in regime change across the planet. And if this video is anything to go by, the outcomes for the nations changed proved that it wasn't always for the better.
Saddam in 2003, right? WMDs.
Thank you for watching.
Great video. I've come to have, you know, when you grow up in the USA, you know, you have the 4th of July and you're taught so many of this stuff. I mean, you are taught, you know, slavery, what happened to Native Americans, you're taught that stuff. But when it gets into more of the 20th century and early 21st century stuff, I feel like I don't remember hearing as much about it. And I mean, I went through high school in the late 2000s. And so maybe not enough was clear at the moment to teach or whatever, but yeah, my romantic view of the country is just wiped away. I do like my country even after watching a video like this, right? You might think I would say like screw this country, and I understand if a lot of countries do say that to us. But it's almost it's like the salt in the wound is acting like you're somehow justified in doing what you're doing, rather than just saying, I'm stronger, I don't want you to be communist, I'm taking this, and I don't care what I do. As horrible as that is too, it's almost like it would be less condescending than saying like, nope, this is for democracy and protecting against communism or whatever. So, crazy video. Love y'all. Would appreciate any comments down below. Did I say something you disagree with? Call me out. Answer any of my questions. You guys are always great with that. See you guys next time. We'll keep on learning. Bye.